On Days of Our Lives, the next 2 weeks are about to unleash total chaos. A desperate fight for survival, a terrifying date night disaster, and a miracle that may come with a deadly cost are all about to collide in Salem. So the real question is this: when hope suddenly appears, will it save lives, or destroy them? During the week of March 9 through the 13th, one of the most psychologically intense storylines may center on EJ and Paulina, because this is no ordinary power clash. This is EJ at his most dangerous, not when he is openly attacking someone, but when he is quietly forcing them into an impossible emotional corner. According to the spoilers, EJ pushes Paulina to stop interfering with his secret research. On the surface, that may sound like another typical Salem battle over hidden agendas and shady experiments. But the moment EJ brings Lexi into it, everything changes. Because now this is no longer just about whether the lab is suspicious, whether the power usage is excessive, or whether EJ is once again crossing ethical lines behind closed doors. Now it becomes something much more personal and much more painful. EJ reportedly threatens that if Paulina keeps standing in his way, he could tell Abe and Theo that she is the reason Lexi's resurrection was stopped. And that is a brutal form of emotional blackmail, because it reframes Paulina's entire position. Instead of looking like someone trying to protect the public from something secretive and potentially dangerous, she suddenly risks looking like the woman who robbed a grieving husband and son of a miracle they never thought they'd get. That is what makes EJ's strategy so effective and so cruel. He understands that once hope enters the equation, logic gets weaker. People stop asking whether this research is safe, whether this situation makes sense, or whether EJ can truly be trusted. Instead, they start asking a much more emotional question: what if this is real? What if Lexi really can come back? What if standing in EJ's way means destroying the one impossible chance Abe and Theo have been given? And that is exactly the trap Paulina is being forced into. If she stands firm, she may be doing the responsible thing. She may be trying to stop something secretive, unstable, and deeply unethical before it goes any further. But emotionally, that choice could be used against her. It could be twisted into an act of cruelty. It could be framed as selfishness, fear, or heartlessness. And EJ knows that. He knows Paulina is not just a public figure. She is part of this family's emotional reality. So he is not pressuring her with evidence. He is pressuring her with guilt. That is classic EJ Demera. He does not simply defend himself. He shifts the emotional burden onto someone else. He makes another person feel as if doing the right thing could destroy lives, while doing the wrong thing might preserve hope. And that moral confusion is what makes the storyline so compelling. Because Paulina is not being asked to choose between obvious good and obvious evil. She is being asked to choose between two devastating forms of fallout. Either she resists EJ and risks being blamed for ending a miracle, or she gives him room to continue, knowing she may be enabling something far darker than anyone realizes. That is why this part of the story feels bigger than a lab secret. It feels like the beginning of an emotional war over who controls the truth, and who gets blamed when that truth finally comes out. At the same time, the Stephanie storyline continues building into one of the most suspenseful and emotionally satisfying rescue plots Salem has had in a while. Because what makes it work is that Stephanie is not simply sitting in fear and waiting for other people to save her. She fights back, and not recklessly, intelligently. The spoilers reveal that Stephanie talks Owen into undoing her restraints, and that detail alone tells us a lot about where her head is. She is clearly not shut down emotionally. She is thinking, adjusting, reading his behavior, and looking for any crack in the situation she can use to her advantage. That turns her from a passive hostage into an active player in her own survival, which instantly makes the storyline more compelling. Once her restraints are removed, Stephanie seizes the opportunity and swipes Owen's phone in an attempt to call for help. That is a huge moment, because it changes the entire energy of the plot. Suddenly, the rescue is no longer only happening from the outside. It is also being pushed forward from within. Stephanie is not just hoping someone finds her. She is trying to create the breakthrough herself. And that raises the suspense in a major way. Because the moment a trapped character takes a risk like that, every second becomes more dangerous. If the signal stays active long enough, it could finally lead people to the lab. That means one stolen phone call could become the thread that unravels the entire kidnapping nightmare. But at the same time, the move is incredibly risky. If Owen catches her, the consequences could be immediate. The danger could escalate fast, especially if the people around her are already unstable or starting to lose control. That's what makes this such a strong storyline. Stephanie is being written as alert, capable, and proactive, but those very strengths may also put her in even greater danger before help arrives. And that help does start moving. Kat assists Kayla by cracking the code needed to get inside, which gives the rescue story another important layer. Kat is no longer just emotionally invested in Stephanie's safety. She becomes part of the mechanism that may lead to Stephanie being found. Meanwhile, Steve brings Rafe into the investigation, which means the search starts shifting from panic to coordinated action. That transition matters. Because once multiple people begin moving with purpose, the storyline gains real momentum. Steve and Brady go off searching for the stalker, while Rafe and Alex head straight for the lab itself. That split creates two different kinds of suspense at once. One side of the story is chasing the person responsible. The other is chasing the truth hidden behind locked doors. And that structure is what gives the storyline its edge. On one track, there is the human urgency of saving Stephanie before time runs out. On the other, there is the growing mystery of what else may be happening in that lab, and whether Stephanie's kidnapping is only one part of a much bigger secret. That means the rescue is no longer just about getting someone out. It is also about what may be uncovered the moment the wrong door opens. So while Stephanie is doing everything she can to create her own chance at escape, the people outside are finally getting closer. And when those two efforts collide, the outcome could be explosive. From there, the storyline becomes even more layered, because this is where the spoilers start blurring the lines between who is guilty, who is panicking, and who may still be more dangerous than anyone realizes. One of the most intriguing details is that Jeremy apparently teams up with Stephanie on a scheme, and the two even fall into a relieved embrace. That is a fascinating twist, because it immediately complicates the picture. Up to this point, Jeremy has been sitting in the orbit of this hostage situation in a way that makes him look suspicious, unstable, and potentially threatening. But if he is helping Stephanie, then the story may be preparing to flip audience assumptions in a big way. And that kind of reversal works perfectly in a storyline like this. Because hostage plots are always at their most effective when the emotional map keeps shifting. The person who looks guilty may not be fully guilty. The person who looks helpless may be driving the action. The person who seems in control may actually be the one closest to collapse. Jeremy and Stephanie sharing a relieved embrace suggests there may be a moment where survival becomes more important than blame, and that could be exactly the kind of image that gets misread seconds later by the wrong person. At the same time, across town, Owen gets cornered once Steve spots and recognizes him. That is a major development, because Owen has felt like one of the darker and more calculating presences in this whole story. The moment Steve gets physical with him and starts demanding answers about Stephanie, the pressure intensifies across every side of the plot. It means the walls are closing in. The people involved no longer have the luxury of time, secrecy, or control. But the timeline becomes even more suspenseful because while Steve is confronting Owen, Rafe and Alex are already inside the lab. That parallel action is what gives this entire section its momentum. Rafe ends up marveling over the glowing tube, which strongly suggests that the secret lab mystery is finally starting to collide with the kidnapping story in a major way. That image alone signals that this is not just a rescue plot anymore. It is a rescue plot tangled up with something far stranger, far bigger, and potentially far more emotionally explosive. While Rafe is staring at evidence that the lab is hiding something shocking, Alex is heading straight into the most personal confrontation of the week. He barges into the storeroom where Stephanie was last seen with Jeremy, and that sets up a private showdown between the two men. Alex reportedly clobbers Jeremy and calls him an SOB, and on the surface, that sounds like pure emotional payoff. It is the kind of moment viewers expect in a storyline like this. The boyfriend arrives, sees chaos, assumes the worst, and lashes out. But that is exactly why this part of the plot may be more complicated than it appears. Because if Jeremy was actually trying to help Stephanie by that point, then Alex may be reacting to the scene emotionally rather than accurately. He may be seeing an embrace and reading betrayal, when in reality he is walking in on the aftermath of an escape scheme or a moment of relief between two people who thought they had finally found a way out. That possibility could make the whole confrontation much more interesting. Instead of Alex simply becoming the hero who charges in and takes down the bad guy, he may become the character forced to realize that he acted on incomplete information. And if Stephanie is reunited with him soon after, then the emotional fallout may not just be relief. It may also be embarrassment, regret, and a major apology. That is why the spoilers suggesting Alex could owe Jeremy a huge apology are so important. Because they hint that the story may be setting up a misjudgment twist, and those are often some of the most satisfying beats in soap storytelling. A confrontation that looks simple in the moment can become much richer afterward once the truth starts sorting itself out. So what makes this part of the storyline so strong is that it is no longer just about rescue. It is about confusion under pressure. It is about people making split-second judgments in a situation where nothing is as clear as it looks. And it is about the possibility that by the time the truth finally comes out, some of the most explosive moments may have already happened for all the wrong reasons. Then there's Kat and EJ, and this may be one of the most intriguing emotional shifts in the entire 2-week preview because it introduces a very different kind of danger. Up to this point, Kat's energy around EJ has been driven by suspicion, frustration, and the need for answers. She corners him and demands to know whether he was responsible for Stephanie's abduction, which immediately tells us that EJ's reputation is still doing a lot of damage even before any new proof comes out. In Salem, EJ does not get the benefit of the doubt. His history is too dark, too complicated, and too wrapped up in manipulation for anyone to hear him say, "I didn't do it," and simply relax. That is why this scene matters. Because even if EJ is telling the truth about not being behind this specific kidnapping, Kat is still dealing with a man whose entire identity has been shaped by secrets, control, and emotional games. So the tension here is not just about whether she believes his words. It is about whether she is allowing herself to step emotionally closer to someone who always seems to come with hidden costs. And according to the spoilers, that is exactly where this may be heading. If Kat decides she believes EJ, the two may find themselves on the verge of a kiss. On the surface, that sounds like a softer beat in the middle of all the chaos, a moment of vulnerability, emotional release, and sudden connection after fear and uncertainty. But because this involves EJ, it can never feel purely romantic. There is always another layer underneath. That is what gives this possible kiss its edge. It would not simply be about attraction. It would be about trust, and trusting EJ is one of the riskiest choices any character can make. Even when he is being sincere, he rarely exists outside a larger web of secrets. So if Kat moves toward him emotionally, she may not just be responding to chemistry. She may be responding to relief, to the need to believe someone, or to the feeling that after everything spiraling around her, she wants one solid answer from someone who sounds certain. That can be a very dangerous foundation for intimacy. Because if a kiss does happen, it may not calm the storyline down. It may complicate it. The moment Kat lets her guard down, the emotional stakes rise. If EJ is hiding anything, even something unrelated to Stephanie's abduction, then that moment of closeness could become a setup for betrayal, disappointment, or emotional confusion later. And even if he is telling the truth now, the audience still has reason to stay cautious. That is what makes this potential pairing so interesting from a storytelling perspective. It blends vulnerability with suspicion. It turns a possible romantic development into something that feels unstable by design. Instead of asking, do they have chemistry? The more important question becomes, what happens when chemistry starts overriding judgment? Because in Salem, that is often when the real trouble begins. So this possible kiss may look like comfort on the surface, but underneath it, the danger is still there, quieter than the kidnappings and confrontations, maybe, but potentially just as destructive once emotions get involved. Then we move into the week of March 16th through the 20th, and this is where the tone of the spoilers seems to shift into something even darker, because what begins like a normal date may turn into one of the most disturbing turns of the entire 2-week stretch. Ari agreeing to go on a real date with Liam initially sounds like a welcome change of pace. On paper, it feels like the kind of storyline that should bring a little lightness, maybe some awkward sweetness, some nerves, some youthful romantic energy. In the middle of all Salem's usual chaos, a date like that should feel simple. But Days of Our Lives almost never leaves simple, alone for long. The spoilers make it very clear that this date does not stay sweet for long. In fact, it may end in horror, and that wording alone tells us this is not just a minor interruption or an uncomfortable surprise. This sounds like a genuine threat crashing into a moment that should have felt safe. That is what makes the setup so effective. The show is taking a scene that viewers would normally read as innocent and turning it into something frightening. That contrast is powerful, because it means Ari may go into this date expecting nerves, excitement, or curiosity, and instead end up face to face with danger she never saw coming. That kind of emotional whiplash is exactly how Salem turns ordinary moments into trauma. And Liam appears to be at the center of that shift. The spoilers suggest Liam gets tangled up in danger, and Klaus may show up and drag him away from Ari. If that happens, the scene could be incredibly unsettling, because it would mean Ari is not just hearing about danger after the fact, she may be witnessing it in real time. She may see someone she just agreed to spend time with suddenly pulled into something violent, secretive, and terrifying before she can even process what's happening. That would be a shocking escalation. And it becomes even darker when you consider the motive. Klaus may be trying to tie up loose ends for Vivian, which means Liam could be in danger because he recognized Klaus and helped the cops create that sketch. So this is not random. This is targeted. That makes the threat feel colder and more deliberate, because Liam would not just be unlucky, he would be marked. And if Ari is caught in the middle of that, the emotional fallout could be huge. The spoilers say Ari eventually runs straight into Gabby's arms after something scares her, which strongly suggests she will come out of this shaken, frightened, and emotionally rattled. That reaction tells us the story may not stop at suspense. It may leave lasting emotional damage. Ari could walk into this expecting a first real romantic experience and come out of it with fear attached to the memory instead. That is what makes this storyline so disturbing. It weaponizes innocence. It takes a situation that should represent young excitement and turns it into a harsh reminder that in Salem, danger can erupt anywhere, even in moments that are supposed to feel normal. And from a storytelling standpoint, that makes this part of the preview especially effective, because it does not just threaten Liam. It threatens Ari's sense of safety. So the bigger question here is not only whether Liam escapes what's coming. It's whether Ari can walk away from this without being deeply changed by what she sees. Because if this date really does end in horror, then the emotional aftermath may matter just as much as the danger itself. And then there's the storyline that may deliver the biggest burst of physical danger in the second week. Sean and JJ leaping into action as a shootout erupts. Even before we get to the possibility of someone being hit, the mere fact that the spoilers are pointing toward a shootout tells us the tone is escalating fast. Once guns enter the picture, the stakes change immediately. This is no longer a confrontation that can be talked down easily or contained with one brave move. A shootout means chaos, panic, split-second decisions, and the very real chance that someone pays for one wrong step with their life. And based on the spoilers, Sean may be the one who takes the bullet. That possibility alone makes this storyline feel enormous, because Sean is not some random player on the edge of the action. If he gets shot, the impact will not stop with the moment itself. It will ripple outward emotionally across everyone tied to him. It becomes a crisis, not just an incident. That is why scenes like this hit so hard in soap storytelling. The gunshot is only the beginning. Yes, the immediate suspense comes from whether Sean survives. But the deeper drama comes from everything that follows. The fear, the guilt, the anger, the second-guessing, and the emotional unraveling that can happen when people start asking how it got this far. Was someone too reckless? Was someone too slow? Did one wrong call trigger the whole disaster? Those questions can haunt a storyline long after the actual shooting ends. And Sean being the one injured would make the fallout especially potent because it instantly turns him from action taker to potential victim. One moment he is leaping into danger, trying to stop something before it gets worse. The next, he could be the one whose body absorbs the price of that danger. That reversal is exactly what gives shootout storylines their power. The heroism is real, but so is the consequence. And that may be the key theme here. This may not just be a scene designed for shock. It may be a reminder that once Salem's danger crosses into violence, nobody gets through it untouched. Even the people trying to do the right thing can end up bleeding for it. So if Sean really takes a bullet, then the second week may not just deliver action. It may deliver one of its most painful emotional consequences at the exact same time. And finally, we get to what may be the most emotional and potentially most shocking payoff of the entire two-week preview. Abe and Theo getting what looks like a miracle. If Lexi truly has risen from the grave, then the impact of that reunion could be enormous. For Abe and Theo, this would not just be surprising. It would be life-altering. It would mean confronting the return of someone they lost, grieved, and likely believed they would never see again. And because that kind of return touches such deep emotional history, the first reaction is almost guaranteed to be overwhelming. That is what makes this storyline so powerful on the surface. It plays directly into grief, longing, and the fantasy of impossible restoration. The idea of a family being given another chance with someone they thought was gone forever is the kind of emotional material soaps love to explore, because it hits both the heart and the imagination. For Abe and Theo, seeing Lexi again could unleash shock, disbelief, relief, and joy all at once. It could be one of those rare moments where words fail and emotion takes over. But on this show, miracles never arrive without questions. And that is where the storyline gets even more fascinating. Because a resurrection in Salem is never just a happy ending. It is also a warning sign. It forces everyone, both the characters and the audience, to start asking what miracle really means in this context. Is this exactly what it appears to be? What was done behind the scenes to make it happen? Who knew about it? Who was manipulated? And what price may still be waiting to reveal itself after the initial emotional reunion? That is why this plot may become bigger than simple shock value. The emotional reunion is only one layer. Underneath it is a much more unsettling mystery about what is real, what is ethical, and whether this miracle has been engineered in a way that could create new devastation later. That is especially important because of how much pressure has already been placed on Paulina over the idea of Lexi's return. If she has been emotionally blackmailed into silence over this so-called miracle, then the reunion does not just carry hope. It carries the weight of manipulation and secrecy too. So while Abe and Theo may be overwhelmed by seeing Lexi again, viewers are likely to be pulled in two directions at once. Emotionally, the moment may feel huge, beautiful, and impossible not to react to. But analytically, it may also feel deeply suspicious. And that tension is what makes the storylines so strong. It asks the audience to feel the miracle while also questioning it. To celebrate the reunion while also wondering whether it is the beginning of another disaster. Because in Salem, the return of hope often arrives with a hidden cost attached. So the biggest question may not be whether Lexi comes back. It may be what her return unleashes once the first wave of emotion wears off. Because if this really is a miracle, it could heal one family in a way nobody thought possible. But if it is something darker dressed up as a miracle, then Abe and Theo may be walking straight into a whole new nightmare without even realizing it. That is what makes the next 2 weeks feel so strong. One storyline is about rescue. One is about revenge. One is about terror interrupting innocence. And one is about hope returning in the most unbelievable way possible. But all of them are connected by the same central tension. In Salem, the moment that feels like salvation is often the moment everything starts to unravel. So as we head into March 9th through the 20th, the biggest questions are clear. Will Stephanie's rescue come before the lab secrets explode? Will Ari's terrifying date change everything for her? Will Sean survive the danger ahead? And when Abe and Theo finally come face to face with Lexi, will that reunion heal old pain, or open the door to an even bigger shock? Because in Salem, nothing stays simple for long. And over these next 2 weeks, that may be the most dangerous truth of all.